The U.S. government will likely avoid defaulting on its debts for now. Senate leaders say they have reached a deal to extend federal borrowing until early December. Democrats accepted Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's offer to raise the debt ceiling by a fixed amount, putting off a vote on longer-term legislation that Republicans vowed to block. Meanwhile, President Biden traveled to Illinois to push for vaccine mandates as a new report highlights their effectiveness. The president spoke with officials at one of the Midwest's largest construction companies outside of Chicago this afternoon.
Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, I'm allowed to insist that anyone doing any government work has to be vaccinated, all federal workers and federal contractors. And it's beginning to make a profound change in the number of people who are not vaccinated. And you saw what United Airlines did. United Airlines had real trouble until they mandated it. And excuse me, I'm standing fine.
You're doing great.
And now they're at 90-some%. You know, and we're saving lives. This has been the most recent pandemic is a consequence of the unvaccinated.
Plus, Democrats are still haggling over the size and scope of the president's social and climate spending plan. According to Axios, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin is telling colleagues they need to cut 2 out of the president's 3 signature policies from the package. He wants them to choose between the expanded child tax credit, paid family medical leave, or subsidies for child care. Senator Bernie Sanders reacted to the pushback from Senators Manchin and Sinema Thursday, saying, quote, 2 people do not have a right to sabotage what 48 want. He called on Manchin to be more specific about what he wants and to explain his position to the American people. Let's bring in Nancy Cortez, Tara Palmeri, and Josh Kraushaar. Nancy is CBS News chief White House correspondent. Tara is the co-author of the Politico Playbook, and Josh writes the Against the Grain column for the National Journal. Welcome. It's good to have you all. Nancy, let me start with you. What does this debt ceiling compromise do for Democrats and the White House?
Well, what it does is it sort of clears the decks for them to focus on finally cementing a deal within their own party on the president's signature piece of legislation, this big climate and social spending bill that they had been hoping to get across the finish line last month. They ran into some snags when they couldn't bring Manchin and Sinema on board. So now they want to get it done in October. And instead of spending that time fighting with Republicans to try to raise the debt ceiling, instead they'll be able to lift it at least temporarily. They will still have to come back in November and December and have this fight all over again, try to figure out how to raise the debt ceiling in a more permanent fashion. But at the very least, we know that the full faith and credit of the United States is going to be secure for now, so Democrats can work on that big social spending bill.
Yeah, so Tara, why did Senator Mitch McConnell change his position here, and are Republicans backing him on this?
It's interesting. Republicans are not all backing him on this. Senator Lindsey Graham said that he did not agree with this. But ultimately, there was a lot of pressure from the business community, and there was the real threat that the stock market could crash, that we could go into default. And, you know, this has been a bit of it's been a game of chicken between McConnell and Schumer. Schumer wants Republicans to vote for an extension of the debt limit, and McConnell wants to blame Democrats in the midterms for the debt, for the fact that we have a massive deficit. And if Republicans vote to extend that, then it's they don't have that talking point anymore. So they're sort of staring each other down. McConnell gave out a little bit, $480 billion, but that just means he basically put a Band-Aid on it. It really wasn't a win for Schumer. He did cave, but there was a lot of pressure from the business something.
All right. On the pandemic, Nancy, the White House has some new data to report on the effectiveness of vaccine mandates. What did they find, and why did the president choose Elk Grove Village, Illinois, for this announcement?
Well, he spoke at a big construction site in Illinois, where the construction management company has recently imposed a vaccine mandate or testing requirement. And that is what his message was, pushing more and more employers to go ahead and require that their employees get vaccinated, because the report that he was touting, issued by the White House, argues that since late July, when the president began pushing for the entire federal workforce to get vaccinated and began pushing more aggressively for companies around the country to get their workers vaccinated, that we've seen a big decrease in the number of unvaccinated Americans. Specifically, they say that the number of eligible Americans who are currently unvaccinated dropped from about 95 million down to 67 million within a period of just a couple of months. And they say that that is because so many of these Americans were told, if you don't get vaccinated, you're going to lose your job. And the president, actually, interestingly, in his announcement said that he himself was not on board with the idea of vaccine mandates for a long time. It wasn't his first choice. But as the months dragged on and the number of unvaccinated Americans stayed pretty significant, he felt that both the administration and private companies needed to change course. And that's why he is pushing for so many of them to get on board. Pretty soon, a lot of large companies won't have any choice, because the Labor Department is getting ready to issue a rule that says that any company with more than 100 employees has to require its employees to either get vaccinated or submit to regular testing.
Well, this issue of vaccine mandates has really become a hot-button topic, including in the state of Virginia. And Josh, some see Virginia's governor's race as a potential preview of how Democrats will fare in the 2022 midterms. You wrote for National Journal that it's shaping up as a test of whether there is a silent majority of voters quietly chafing against Democratic overreach who are underrepresented in public polls. Josh, what evidence are you seeing to suggest that Democrats might be out of touch with the majority of voters?
Well, look, it is going to be a big political barometer next month. And the two campaigns in Virginia are taking diametrically opposite views when it comes to the vaccine mandate part of it. McAuliffe, the Democrat, former governor, is leaning in to this notion that a vast majority of Virginians want everyone in schools, healthcare settings, and even private businesses to have the vaccine and then require it. And Glenn Youngkin, the Republican, has been very pro-vaccine, but has really drawn a wedge in saying he doesn't think that government should tell companies what to do when it comes to vaccinations. Democrats think they have got a winning issue, and the public polling broadly backs them up on that. But Republicans are seeing some pockets of discontent, namely among working class Virginians of all races. There's this, anecdotal examples that a lot of voters don't like the notion of companies laying off workers because of their vaccination decisions. Joe Biden, at his speech in Illinois just a few minutes ago, acknowledged that there were a sizable number of layoffs, even though it's a very small percentage of the overall workforce. And that economic backlash that will be taking place if the mandates go through, if they're passed into law, really could create a political backlash and create some headwinds for Democrats.
Well, Josh, if Democrat Terry McAuliffe does succeed in winning the governorship in Virginia, what do you think that will say about a miscalculation on the Republican side?
Yeah, I mean, this is a bet on the culture wars. Republicans are going heavy on opposing the mandate part of the vaccine mandate, and also on educational issues, critical race theory, school choice, merit and excellence in schools. So these are issues that Democrats aren't necessarily engaging in. So McAuliffe, very confident that the majority of Virginians support his view on the vaccine mandate, that they don't care about some of these culture war, divisive, polarizing issues. And so Virginia will, if McAuliffe wins, I think it's a pretty strong sign that Virginia is a state that's diversifying. It's got a pretty solid college-educated population, and that McAuliffe's view on these issues is the way Democrats are going to win in states that are this blue and have this similar type of political composition.
Meantime, Tara, Politico has some new reporting to suggest that the expanded child tax credit might not be the winning issue that Democrats had hoped it would be. What are the findings, and how could it impact the negotiations taking place over their social spending package?
We found in our morning consult Politico poll that only 1 in 3 respondents actually wanted the child care tax credit to expand past 2022. And so it was a surprising number because they believe this was a popular policy. The other thing was that the respondents did not give credit for the Democrats. The respondents who were favorable towards child tax credits, they didn't give credit to Democrats. They didn't Republicans either, but Democrats are really going behind these social spending programs like the bipartisan infrastructure deal and the reconciliation package, the Build Back Better package, with the hopes that will return dividends at the polls in the midterm elections, right? Because they know that they have very slim majority in the House, no real majority in the Senate, and they need some winners, and they need to show that they did something during those 2 years, that they passed some legislation that helps everyday Americans. The problem is that the legislation has to be popular and the money needs to go into their pockets. No matter what they pass the child tax credit, people will still keep receiving it until after, I believe they'll keep receiving it right up until the midterm election. So again, it's an issue that a lot of Democrats, progressives are fighting for, that climate change, but it might not be worth it from just a political standpoint.
Yeah, it is really interesting to hear about how that is interpreted and perceived by voters, and who gets credit or doesn't get credit, politically speaking, for that. Well, Josh, you recently wrote for the National Journal that President Biden is holding his own infrastructure bill hostage to the demands of House progressives. They say they won't vote for the bill unless their priorities are met in the larger social spending package. How can the president, do you think, get a much-needed legislative win?
Well, I think getting something done, and you have that infrastructure bill that I know the president has said it's tied now to the larger social spending bill. But, in a way, the White House is shooting itself in the foot. You have a popular bipartisan package that has Republican support that could win some House Republican votes. And yet the president is waiting and betting that he can build a partisan coalition, get every Democrat in the Senate, including Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, to vote for the larger social spending bill and try to find some compromise number on it. But I think it goes to the larger point that Tara was talking about. The White House earlier in the year thought the $1.9 trillion in stimulus was a winning issue. The economy would be booming. The pandemic would be going away. And giving people money, $100 if they have kids, a few $100s every month would be something that would be tangible and would lead to positive political results. And instead, you see voters of all stripes worried about inflation and wary about the scope of spending, about the unintended consequences that could result from it. And, the polling numbers that Politico and Morning Consult put out were pretty striking. The expectation was that it would be broadly popular and that voters would credit the White House for getting it done. Instead, they don't even really know that Joe Biden was responsible for that legislation. 38% of voters said Biden was responsible, a surprisingly low number. So I think there's a little bit of political hubris, a little bit of disconnect in the White House compared to what we're seeing on the ground, what Democrats who represent these states and these constituencies are seeing and hearing from their voters. They're wary about where the economy is. They're wary about the levels of spending. And that's why you have a backlash, even within the Democratic Party, on this big legislation.
So, Nancy, let me ask you then, what have you heard from your perspective there? Talking to White House officials, this would seem to be something that was unexpected, given what they may have been banking on, quote unquote, trying to ensure that there was credit given to President Biden and the Biden administration for this. But now, at least, there's evidence with the polling showing that it doesn't appear to be resonating, at least among some voters.
I think that there is a widespread acknowledgement, at least among Democrats on Capitol Hill, that they haven't done a great job selling the accomplishments earlier in the president's term when it comes to COVID relief, and also trying to sell the American people now on what's in this big $2 to $3.5 trillion bill. Now, part of the reason is because they're so focused right now on trying to negotiate. They're focused inward, trying to get a deal. That you don't have the president barnstorming the country right now to sort of tout what's in it and get the American people on board, because time is really of the essence if they're going to try to cement a deal by the end of the year. So in one sense, there is a feeling that there's time. If they can craft this deal, if they can get it over the finish line, if they can get the bipartisan infrastructure deal over the finish line, then they can go out and let the American people know what's in it, and they'll have time before the midterm elections. At the same time, as Josh noted, people's views may be cemented by then, and they'll be onto other things, onto other issues. So there is a question about whether they missed a window to sell how great this bill was going to be in their view for the American people before they ended up passing, and they're still hoping they can do it, $2 trillion worth of new spending.
Right, because in the meantime, you have Republicans talking about this spending being out of control and sending that message consistently at a time where, as you say, Nancy, there hasn't been as much focus on selling what specifically is in these plans. All right, well, Nancy Cordes, Tara Palmeri, and Josh Kraushaar, great to have you all. Thank you very much.